Hi everyone, I'm Mike from the Media Man Studio Services, and on our channel we try to bridge that gap between the creative content and the technical requirements. Today's technical requirement is how to set up a NAS device for your creative environment. So we're going to walk you through the entire process of setting up all the pools and getting the storage ready for users to use on your network. So if you've been watching my series on how to choose a NAS for your creative environment, you know in part 1 we looked at the different hardware options as well as some of the drive configurations that you can have in QNAP NAS devices. In part 2 we looked at the different file services or operating systems that were available. We took a look at ZFS as well as QTS, and we compared the difference between tiered storage as well as data caching to help improve performance on the NAS device. So in part 3, we're going to take a look at how to set up QTS on my NAS device here behind me, as well as set up all the storage pools and apply tiered storage so we can help increase the performance, and I'll be able to transfer all the data to my workstations a lot faster. So let's start the install procedure itself. One of the things I wanted to show you guys was when you're installing hard drives into these drive sleds, it's toolless. So if you have a hard drive like this one here, you just actually sit it into the drive sled itself, and it comes with these little drive rails, and you just pop those in the side. And there's one for both sides. And once you've done that, you just actually then insert the drive into the drive bay itself, closing it down, and then there is a key lock to keep it in place. So for the SSD drives, those are also toolless, and you can just actually place the drive into the drive sled itself, click it in, and slide it into the drive bay. And you can also actually install the SSD drives into the 3.5-inch bays, but you do have to actually screw it into the back, and it's not a toolless design, but that will allow you to put the faster SSD drives into the larger hard drive bays. So once you've screwed it down, you can then just insert it into the device. Very simple. So today we're going to be basically creating a storage pool, and I wanted to discuss a little bit about what is a storage pool. Think of a storage pool as like the hardware level. We're taking a bunch of hard drives and we're grouping them all together, and it could be multiple groups of hard drives that we're actually creating one large storage pool. So in our case, we're going to have SATA drives, or the slower high capacity drives, and we're going to have SSD drives that are sort of the faster flash storage devices. But we're going to group the entire thing together and call it one storage pool. So the next level underneath that's going to be the volume level. Think of the volume level as the software layer. So that's where we're going to have the different containers of data for people to use on the storage itself. Here's a great example of that. So if you have a studio, for instance, and you have a production side of the company and you have an administration side of the company, you might want to keep those two volumes separate from one another. So you can set up a volume for your finance and admin people, and you can set up a volume for your creative and production team. And the way you manage those two volumes can be completely separate. And then the last layer for the storage is going to be the shared folders, or where people actually access and store data on the device itself. So you can create as many shared folders as you like, and they can be separated again from volume. So the layer of the storage is going to be storage pool, then the volume layer, and then the folder layer. So there are a few prerequisites you need before you install a NAS or before you start the installation process, just to make it go a little smoother. You do need a DHCP server on your network. That's a device that's going to automatically apply IP addresses to every device that's connected to the network. It's just going to make it a lot easier for you to set up your NAS device. So any computer you plug into a network port or a network switch in your home or your office, the DHCP server gives it an address and then allows it to communicate on the network itself. So if you have a router, for instance, that was supplied by your ISP, that's probably your DHCP server, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're in an office environment, you might need to have a DHCP server or talk to your IT administrator so they can supply you with an IP address so that you can actually communicate with your NAS device. The second one you're going to need is QNAP's Qfinder Pro. It's an application that you can install on your desktop, and it will automatically find all of the QNAP devices on your network. This is a great way to start the setup so that you don't have to find out what the IP address is of the device itself and then hunt for that on your network. You just start Qfinder Pro, and it finds the NAS that's on the network, and then you can start configuring it directly inside the Qfinder application itself. So just do a simple Google search for Qfinder Pro, and it'll take you to the QNAP's utility website, and you can download it under Essentials, and there is Qfinder Pro for Windows, Mac, or any Linux version that you're using. So once you're inside the QNAP Qfinder itself, you'll notice I have 3 devices here. I have the switch. This is a 10 gig switch that's right behind me. I have another NAS device that's actually sitting here in the studio, and here's the one that we're going to configure today. So it's got the part number of the NAS device. So if you don't know that, it's actually on the device itself, or it's in the manual. So once you've started it up, you can actually just double click. It's going to open up a web browser and take you directly to the first page of the startup. So the first page you get is check warranty. I highly recommend going through this process. You want to register the device so that you're going to get the warranty, the 3 or 5 years warranty, whatever comes with your device. And then you're going to get any notifications for updates that's available. I've already run through that process. So the second screen you're going to see is choosing the operating system. And we went through this in version 2 or in the second part of this video series. And I currently have QTS installed on the device already. If I had QUTS installed, these options would be reversed and you would see, switch to QTS here. So I'm going to start the smart installation and it's going to ask, do I want to specify the firmware version? So the firmware version that came with it when you actually bought the device might be a little old. So you definitely want to look up what the latest version is. And you can actually do that on the website itself. If you go into the support part of the website, pick your NAS, how many bays it has, the model, and it'll tell you the versions here. So they currently have version 5.0, but I tried 5.0 and there's still a few bugs and things that they need to work out. So we're using 4.5.4 1800 build. And I can download that, or I can actually check for the latest version right here in the GUI setup itself. If I've downloaded the file, I can say upload file and then browse to the file on my network, click OK, and then it will update the firmware automatically. Since I've already got the current version, I'm just going to click next. Here's where I can name my NAS. And I'm actually going to change it to MediaMan _NAS. And I can set my admin password. So once you've named your NAS and set your password, we can then click next. Oh, so naming my NAS, it didn't like the underscore. So we'll rename it MediaMan NAS, click next. You can then set up the time zone that you're in, or you can actually specify something like a NTP server or a time server. So right now I'm not actually connected to the internet, so I will just specify the time zone that I'm in. Click next. Yes, we'll set it up as DHCP right now. Later I will actually show you how you can set up a static IP address for this. And it's a great idea to set up a static IP for your NAS device. That way, the IP address of the device itself never changes on your network. So if you're connecting with a device using an IP address instead of, say, a URL or a device name, it's automatically going to always take you there because sometimes DHCP will change the IP addresses of device randomly on your network, depending on when the lease expires for that IP address. Right now, I'm going to set it up for Windows, but you can set it up for Windows, Mac, and Linux. You can also set these later, so you don't have to choose now and never be able to go back. So right now we'll just set it up for Windows. And here's a summary of all of the stuff that I'm actually setting up. MediaMan, the admin, the password, the time zone that I'm in, DHCP, and file sharing for Windows. I'm going to click apply. This is going to initialize the drive itself. And if there's any data that's on the hard drives, it could be erased at this point. So this process itself is going to take quite a few minutes to run through, just getting it all ready and set up for you to start creating storage pools on the device. So that process is complete. We've already set up the entire NAS as far as the initial setup goes. So it'll take us back to the login dialog box. Again, if you have any problems connecting to this, you can use the Qfinder Pro and then just double click and it'll open up a web page. For now, I'm going to click Remember Me, but for security reasons, you might not want to do that on your network or depending on how public or shared your machine is. The nice thing about the QNAP environment is, or using QNAP NAS, is there's GUI wizards to walk you through the entire thing. And it's telling me that there's a firmware update to version 5. Remind me again in 7 days. This is a good thing to leave on because if you do have an update to the firmware, especially security updates, you might want to do this. So I do not want to use version 5. I've already tested it. It has a few bugs, so I'm not going there. There's the Help Center where you can get a lot of information. And these are some of the licenses that are available. And I can install these licenses, and I'll do that later. So it says right here, there's no system volume. To start using the NAS, you must create a storage pool and a volume in the pool. So if you want to create a storage pool, and that's what we're going to do now. So that's the next step of this whole process. So we click Storage Pools, and let's discuss some of the things here. So it says, Welcome to Storage and Snapshots. And it talks about how to set up a storage pool and then creating volumes on top of that. and then you can create your shared folders on top of that. And it discusses what a storage pool and how it actually works, taking snapshots, and we'll talk about setting up snapshots in a future video, and then replicating, where you can actually replicate the entire NAS over to another NAS, be it in your facility or actually over the network to a remote facility. If you go under Overview, it's just going to give you what you currently have. And I have installed 4 SSDs, and I have 6 SATA hard drives, the large capacity spinning drives. I have 1 empty bay, and I actually do have an SSD plugged into one of the hard drive bays. And you can get information on each individual drive, which is really nice. So if you wanted to get information on each drive, and you'll see that it actually indicates where that is in the drive itself. Here's the 4 SSDs. Here's the spinning high capacity SATA drives. And you can get disk health information if the drive's any good. And that is a great thing to have for your SSDs. It has health information. And it'll do this about once a week. It'll actually poll the system and check your drives to see if they're still healthy. One of the other things I wanted to show you in here is performance test. You can actually do a performance test on all of your drives. I haven't actually run one yet, but it'll do a performance test to see if all the drives are relatively performing the same as a comparable drive in the system. So if you notice one of your SSDs is running really low or at a slower speed, you might want to replace that drive. So the next thing we're going to do is come down here to storage and snapshots, and we're going to actually create our first storage pool. So it's saying there's no volumes and or storage pools. So you can click plus. And this is the dialog box that'll help us, or the wizard that's going to help us walk through the entire system. So there is a checkbox here for enable Q-tiering, auto-tiering storage. So we can actually either set that up here, or we can do it actually later after we set up the pool. But I'm going to actually set it up here. And here it kind of explains what it does. It takes the storage pool itself, which could be a mixture of different kind of medias and hard drives, and it sorts out the data for, frequently used, less frequently used, and then, stuff that's not used quite often at all. So we're not actually using SAS. We're just going to do a 2-level tiering. We're going to use SSDs and SATA drives. So the first thing it asks us to do is my tier, the ultra high speed SSDs. Pick all the SSDs that I want to use. And I'm going to use 4 of those. Although I do have another drive way down here at the bottom that's an SSD sitting in one of the hard drive bays. But we're just going to use 4 for now. It says you need to pick a RAID configuration. I can do RAID 0, which means no striping. If one drive fails, you lose data on all of them. But I'm going to choose RAID 5. So what RAID 5 gives us is out of the 4 drives, I can have 1 failure and not lose any data. And I can just replace that failed drive, and it's going to rebuild that stripe set. I'm not going to set up any hot spares, but I will do a hot spare in a future video to the larger capacity pool. The next area it's going to ask for is SATA drives, and it's telling you to pick your disk drives instead of your SSDs, and I have 6 of those. So I'm going to pick all 6 of those, and I can also choose RAID 0, striping, and that way, again, if I lose 1 drive, I lose everything. I can do RAID 5, meaning out of the 6 drives, I can still lose 1 drive and not lose any data. And then there's RAID 6, and this is what I'm going to choose because this is going to be my long-term storage, and I want it to be very secure so that I don't lose any data. RAID 6 will allow me to lose 2 drives. So 2 drives at any one time or 2 drives at the same time, I can actually lose in the entire RAID set and not lose any data. So RAID 6 is your best choice. I could do RAID 10, or RAID 50, but a lot less capacity, sometimes higher performance, but it will cut my capacity down greatly. So with RAID 6, I have 2 what's called piroity drives. Again, I'm not going to set up a hot spare, meaning there'll be a drive in the device waiting for if one fails, it'll automatically pick up that device. But we'll do that in a later video. So over provisioning. So it does want to save 10% of all of the drive space for over provisioning for system storage and any other data that they want to transfer back and forth when it's spooling data across the RAID sets itself. I want to enable SSD over provisioning, and this is a really good idea. We won't go into it too much in this video itself, but SSDs only have a certain amount of write cycles they can do. And with over provisioning, it leaves a little bit of space so it can actually use that space. If there's an error on the drive, it will mark a certain sector bad and not use it anymore. And it also uses that over provisioning again for spooling data onto the drive when it's sorting out or just reconstructing some of the drive information on the hard drive itself or on the flash drive. I am going to set an alert at 80%, so when my storage pool gets to 80%, it's going to send me a notification either in this GUI interface, or if I do actually set up an email address, it'll email me and notify me that there is a warning. The device itself will also start beeping. So it's a great idea because performance after 80% will go down greatly. You never want to fill your storage past 80% or any of your hard drives It's a very bad idea to fill your hard drive past 80%. So here it gives me a summary of what it's going to do. It's going to create a new RAID group, 4 disks of the NAS. It's going to create a RAID 5, and it tells me the SSD 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's going to use 6 disks of the NAS and create a RAID 6. And those drives are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are the high capacity spinning disks, and these are the extremely fast SSD drives. Create. It's going to tell me that all the data on the disks are going to be erased. Do you want to continue? I say yes. So it says this may take a few minutes. It actually takes quite a long time. So if you're watching part 2 of the video, we discussed creating Z pools versus standard RAID configurations. Striping these RAID drives or combining them together takes a really long time for standard RAID configurations. So for this, it's going to probably take about 8 hours to do the large capacity hard drives, and it's probably going to take about 30 or 40 minutes to do the SSDs. But once it's actually configured and up and running, you only do this once. So it does take a lot longer time to set up for QTS versus, say, ZFS file system. But it's very robust, and you don't need to do it again. So it's a long process the first time, but after that, you don't need to worry about it. So you can see in the background here, it's starting to create the storage pool itself. And in the GUI interface, the QNAP GUI interface, up here, one of the items that you might want to take a look at, or some of the areas you might want to take a look at, is running background tasks. So it's a great idea to look here, and you can say it's synchronizing RAID group 1, and it's going to take approximately 33 minutes. So that's the SATA drives themselves. So it's still configuring the RAID group 2, which will be the SATA drives. But that will show up as a background task up here in a second. Oh, and there it pops up right now. So RAID group 2, and it's saying that it's going to take 92 hours. It won't take quite that long, and actually I'll show you an option where you can speed this up a little bit. It's just dumped down to 16 hours. So it says, Qtier will now perform data analysis and tiering automatically. Click the Qtier icon to adjust the tiering schedule. So we'll talk about that a little later, and we'll create a new volume once this is actually done. So I'm going to click close. So here's the option where you can actually set it so that it's going to synchronize a little bit quicker or stripe those RAID drives. So if you come over to the gear icon up here in the top, it's going to bring you into the global settings. You can see the setting over here is under priority. It's set to medium speed, meaning service versus resyncing. Resyncing is the striping, service is people using the device. So if this was actually a device that was in production and you were using it and one of the drives went down and you had to replace it, do you want to affect the users that are actually using the device so that they're going to have slower access? So your answer might be no, or maybe. So service first means no, and it'll take a very long time to correct that failed drive or resync that drive. If you do medium or default, it'll kind of split the performance half and half. In this case, we don't have anybody using it, so we're going to resync first to high speed, and we'll set that on both. And right before we do that, let's just check our times. Right now we have 32 minutes and 6 hours, so I'll click apply, and then we'll revisit this. We're still at 32 minutes and 6 hours, but this time should change. Yeah, 7 hours. It went up a little faster. But in essence, this will actually stripe the drives a lot quicker. So I'm going to wait for these drives to be striped, then we'll come back and we'll start creating volumes and shared folders on the NAS itself. So one of the first things I wanted to show you was how to change the IP address. So again, I want to show you how I got to the network. So that's under the control panel. I came down here to network and virtual switch. So I'm not going to walk through the wizard itself. It can show you all the quick guides. So on my device, I have 6 network ports. I have 4 2.5 gig RJ45 connectors, as well as I have 2 10 gig RJ45 connectors, and that's actually the one I'm using. So you can see here it's connected. So if I come over to the triple dots here, I can actually go configure, and it's set to obtain IP address automatically. So I'm going to set that to static. And one of the reasons why, to tell you the truth, is that I'm having a conflict with this on another device in my office. It already has this IP address. So I've actually disconnected the device from the network after it receives its IP address at boot up, and then I don't have that conflict anymore. But I'm going to use another IP address that's on my network. And you can actually find IP addresses just by pinging space 192.168.0.200 just to see if that's actually on the network. And I'm going to actually plug it back into the network and then see if it actually comes back with any kind of receipt. So it says destination or host unreachable. So that's perfect. I know that this IP address is not being used on the network. And I can come down here and set that up to 200, click apply. Now here's the problem. You'll see the address that I'm actually connecting to is 192.168.0.104. and I just changed the IP address. So it automatically switched over to the new IP address right here, 200. And now it's going to try to walk me through the wizard again. So now that we've created our storage pool, which is actually just a bunch of SATA drives and a bunch of SSD drives, and we've combined them all together to make one large storage pool, we can come into the storage and snapshot section of our control panel, go down to storage and snapshots. And I just wanted to show you this as well. Once you finish creating them, it's actually going to ask you, there's no system volume. So that's the next step, is we're going to create system volumes. And it says, do you want to make a system volume? So here it's showing our storage pool itself. And then we can go up here and we can go create new volume. So remember, the storage pool is sort of the hardware level, all the disks combined together. The volumes is sort of the software level, where we make containers for a different section maybe of our organization. So I'm just going to create 2 volumes. And QNAP always recommends, for best practice, always make the first volume your system volume. Now this is going to be where any applications that you're actually using on the NAS itself, they're going to store this data into the system volume. Think of it as like your C drive on your computer. So we have 3 different volumes to choose from. We have static volume, which basically just creates a static volume. I wouldn't recommend using this one. It doesn't give you a lot of flexibility. It's fast. It does what it's supposed to do. But the other 2, which is thick and thin volumes, give you much more options. So a thick volume, if I supply 10 terabytes of drive space to it, it will allot all 10 terabytes to it, and I'll be able to use that space. So how thin volumes work is that if I assign 10 terabytes to a thin volume, it doesn't reserve the 10 terabytes of drive space. The volume itself expands as you write data to it. So if I write 2 gigs, it'll make a 2 gig size volume. If I write 2 more gigs, it'll put 2 more gigs in the volume. This does take a little performance hit, but it gives you some options. Say you don't have enough drive space currently to create a volume of that size, but a department or somebody in your organization is asking for 10 terabytes of drive space. Well, you can assign that on here, and you can say, yes, you have 10 terabytes of drive space, but they actually physically maybe only have 2 or 3 or 4 terabytes in the system. But you can expand the system as you go. So you can go out and maybe purchase some more hard drives, put them in the device itself, and then as the user's using up that data, their volume is expanding. Now with thick and thin volumes, I can actually expand and contract the size of the volume as needed at any time. So generally, I recommend using the thick volume. For what I'm doing, I'm just going to create a volume for the system drive. I'll click next, and then I'll call this actually system volume, SYS volume, and I'm only going to make it 300 gigabytes. All right, and these are the block sizes that you're actually putting on the drive itself. I'm just going to leave it at its default 32K. I'm going to click Finished. So the volume's actually being created. It's actually creating a bunch of shared folders and stuff on that volume itself. And it takes a few minutes to configure that. And you can see here, creating default folders. So while that's creating, one of the things I wanted to show you is that you can actually expand any one of these pools at any time. For instance, I have 5 SSD drives in the unit itself, but I'm only using 4 of them. So this 5th one I'm not using yet. So I could actually go up here and go expand pool, and then add a new disk to existing RAID group. We created the RAID groups earlier on in this video. And then I could pick that RAID group. And right now it is RAID group 1. It has 4 disks and 0 hot spares. And then I can click next, and it'll automatically add that drive to that high-speed tier, which is the SSD drives. Or I could also, if I wanted to add another SATA drive, I could add that SATA drive here. I also wanted to show you that you can actually remove the high-speed SSD drives or the tiered storage from the pool itself. So if I come up here to remove, I can actually remove ultra-high-speed tier. Now that's sort of grayed out right now because I'm creating folders and volumes in the background, but I could remove that. And what that'll do is it'll take any data that's currently sitting on that high-speed, the Q tier, and it'll move it to the SATA drives. So in the future, if I do want to upgrade these SSDs to 1, 2, or 4 terabytes, I can actually just remove all the data from them, replace the drives in the unit itself, and then recreate a new RAID set, and then apply that as a Q tier. So another thing I wanted to show you while it's actually creating these folders in the background is how we can create users and groups. So if we come into the control panel and we come to users, we can actually create a new user. And I'm going to create a new user, and I'm going to call it MediaMan, and I'll give that a password. All right, and I can add things like optional phone numbers, email. Email is a good idea because you can use this later on for notifications. And then I can apply that to any group that I want. And in this case, I'm going to apply me to the administrators group. And we haven't made any shared permission or folders yet, but you can actually then apply the read and write permissions to what folders. And we can edit these properties over here by changing passwords. We can edit the account profile itself. We can edit what user group it's in, the shared folder permission, as well as application permissions if we're running any applications on the device itself. So one of the best practices that QNAP says that we should do is actually disable our admin account and create a new admin account. And it's a great idea just to keep the device a little bit more secure itself. So now that I've actually created that user in here, I can actually go in and then log in as this user and then go into the admin account. And under account profile, I can then disable the account. Currently it's grayed out because I'm logged in as that user. So once I log in as Media Man, I can then go in and disable the original admin account. So that system volume is now created. And if you look here, you'll notice it does say system right here beside it. And I'm going to create another volume. And I'm going to make that a thick volume on storage pool 1 because I only have one storage pool. I'm going to call that, sure, data volume 1. And I'm going to make that 10 terabytes. So leaving me a little bit of space in case I want to use it for other things like setting up VMs on the storage device itself. So I'll leave the default, the 32K block size. I'll click next. It's giving me a summary of what I'm going to create. I'll click finished. And now we've created 2 volumes on the device itself. The first volume being the system volume and the second volume being the data volume. So on the data volume, once it's completed creating the default folder sets, I will then create a few shared folders on that, and then we'll be able to connect to that from any workstation that's on the network. And then we'll do a few performance tests. So while that's creating all the folders and optimizing the actual data volume itself in the background, I wanted to show you that at any time with the thick volumes, you can actually resize those. So if you click on the volume itself, when we use this system volume as an example, we can come up here to manage and we can click resize. And then we can actually resize this to whatever size we want as long as we don't exceed the amount of storage that's in the drives itself. Now, if it was a thin drive, I could actually, again, exceed my physical capacity, but I would have to add that physical capacity once the time came or once I reached the limit of the hard drives. So I could set this to 600 gigs and then click apply, and it's going to resize that system volume to reflect those changes. Also in the management panel, you can go under actions and set the threshold. I've set my threshold to 80%. You can set caching for the storage itself. And right now caching is enabled and it's just using the internal RAM that's in the device. But if I had some other SSDs or NVMe drives, I could set those up as a read and write cache, which we'll do in a later video. You can check the file system itself and do a little diagnostics on it. I can rename the volume if I wanted to. I can format it and delete all the data that's on there, or I could actually convert it to a thin volume. And you can convert thick to thin and thin to thick, but you cannot convert a static volume. So if you chose the static volume at the very beginning, when you were creating volumes, you cannot change those between the 3 different volume types. So that's why thick and thin volumes have quite a few more options or flexibility. So also while that's optimizing in the background, we can see it's at 93% optimization here. We can go into our control panel and we can go into the shared folders. So we're going to create a new shared folder. So I'm going to call this NAS test. It's going to say what volume do I want to put it on, and I don't want to use the system volume for any of my data. I do want to use the data volume. So I'm going to enable auto tiering, so it's going to use the faster SSDs as well as the slower SATA drives. I could set permissions on the folders. So right now we have Media Man with no access, so we'll give Media Man read and write as well as admin read and write, and I'll create that shared folder. And now I have a NAS test folder. We can also create files and shares from the file station itself that's right here. So making sure you're on the right volume, you can come over here to the 3 dots and you can create a shared folder. So we've got our 2 volumes already set up. We have the data volume as well as the system volume here. One is just under 10 gigs and the other one is 296.2 gigabytes. And now we're actually ready to use these volumes. So how do you actually connect to your NAS? Now there's a couple ways you can connect to your NAS itself. So I can open up a new File Explorer window and I can come down to the networking section. And this will show me all of the network devices that are on my network. And there is my Media Man NAS right there. I can click on it and it's going to show me all of the shared folders that are currently available. By default, it does create a home folder and homes folders because I'm an administrator. I can see all the home folders for all the users, as well as my public folder. as well as a NAS test folder that I set up right here. But I think that there's actually a better way. So if you come up to this PC and you go to Computer, you can go to Map Network Drive. So I'm going to map the network drive. I'm going to call this one, how about M for media? There's two ways that I can do it, and here's an example of it. I could actually go / and use the IP number that we set originally when I set up the NAS, which is 192.168.0.200, and then / and the name of the actual share itself. And I know the share is called NAS test. But there is an easier way. I can just come over here to Browse. I can see the NAS is on the network itself. I can click the share that I want to mount. I'm going to reconnect at sign in, so every time I log in that this will actually mount as a NAS drive, and you can see it down here. And I can click finished. But one of the things I wanted to show you is I can connect as a different user, or connect using different credentials. And I'm actually going to do that to show you that that user account that I made of MediaMan, oops. You got to come down here to show more choices, use a different account, MediaMan. I'm not going to remember credentials, but I do recommend if this is your own personal computer and you're not in a public environment, you want to remember credentials. That way you don't have to type them in every time you try to access it. And there's the drive right there. It's being mounted. So every time I go into my computer or this PC, there's the NAS drive right there. All right, so now let's get to performance. How does this thing actually perform? And what kind of drive or transfer throughput can we get from it? So I'm using the Blackmagic disk speed test. You can download this from the Blackmagic website. Once you've installed it, you can come up to this little gear icon and click Select Target Drive. And I'm going to go to this PC, select that NAS shared folder that I have, select, run. So there I'm getting over 1,000 megabytes of write and over 1,000 megabytes of read. So that's extremely fast. So we can check that and come over here to your task manager, and under the performance tab, we can check the Ethernet. Now I'm running a 10 gig network and a 10 gig switch. So running at about 1,000 megabytes a second is pretty much saturating the entire, we're getting 9.3 gigabytes of send. So that would be the writes. And let's see what we get for receives, about 9.5 gigabytes a second. So almost the entire 10 gigs. So we're almost fully saturating that 10 gig connection. So these read and write speeds are not a limitation of the hard drive. They're actually a limitation of the network connection and cabling that I'm using. So we can also check the performance in the QNAP GUI itself. So if you come up to here and you come down to Resource Monitor, we come down to the Storage and Resources, and we can actually check the disk activity. And we don't want to see IOPS. I explained what IOPS was in part 2 of this video series. We want to see what the throughput is. And it's showing us each individual hard drive that's actually sitting in the device itself. And you can see here that I'm writing at about 141 megabytes a second to each of the 4 drives, 140. So that means I'm using about a third of the actual performance. So if I had 3 other workstations connected to it, then I could fully saturate each of the workstations at 10 gigs. So writing 1,000 megabytes a second probably to 3 or 4 workstations without a problem at all. If I add more drives to this, it's going to increase the performance. You can also see your storage space, so you can see actually how much is being used of both of them. You can check your RAID activity itself, and we can check that through throughput. And you can see here that RAID 1 group, which is my SSDs, is actually doing all of the read and writing right now. None of it's actually going to the SATA drives. So one of the other great options with Qtier is you can actually control which folders are actually using the high-speed storage itself. So if we come over here and we go Manage Qtier Storage Pool 1, and it says here, Qtier On Demand is available. Tiering On Demand allows you to disable auto-tiering for specific shared folders and iSCSI LUNs. So that's what we're going to do right now. So if you come over here to Tiering On Demand, and you click on that, you can see that all of the different shared folders, and right now I only have one folder, NAS Test. So let's quickly create another shared folder. We'll create that right here. Create a shared folder. We'll call this HDD Test, and I'm going to set it up on my volume 1. I am going to not enable auto-tiering. Actually, I'm going to turn that on, and I'll click Create, Create. And I actually turned it on because I want to show you where we can actually turn that off. So if I cancel out of here, so that I can go back in, it's now showing me that I have two folders or two shared folders in that volume itself. And I turned on auto tiering, but I can actually turn it off right here. When can you use this? This would be great if you had libraries like sound libraries, image libraries that you just don't need to have in your fast tier. Create a shared folder for that and turn off enable auto tiering, and it will not use the SSDs. All read and writes will go directly to the SATA drives or the slower high capacity drives. And you can create as many of those shared folders as you want. So when I start archiving my projects, I could create a shared folder called archive, and make sure that I have the enable auto tiering turned off, and then I can put all of my old files in there. They're still there, I can still access them, but they're not using the high tier SSD drives. So the disk speed test has been running in the background all of this time, and you can still see that it's running at over 1,000 megabytes a second of write and 1,000 megabytes a second of read. So the performance on this NAS is just fantastic for video editing or any production environment. So that's about all I wanted to show you in this video. This was part 3 of the video series. In parts 4 and part 5, I will be installing high-speed cache using NVMe drives. I can install 2 NVMe drives into this NAS unit itself, and that will increase the IOPS and the read-write performance of this NAS. I will be also adding a hot swappable spare drive to the SATA drive, to this drive bay right here. I will also be expanding the pool, adding another SSD drive. So we'll also look into some of the other utilities that come with QNAP, like security, and we'll be setting up some of the best practices that QNAP recommends, like setting up email notifications. So if there's anything wrong with the device, I'll be able to get notified by email, as well if there's any updates for the device, especially security patches, so that I can get those on the device very quickly and not have to worry about any hackers trying to hack into my NAS device itself. So in other future parts of the video, I will be setting up how to do remote access, so VPN, so I can VPN from outside of my office into the NAS device and gain access to all of my data very securely. I will also be setting up some VM tools as well as using other transfer and remote utilities. So I'd also like to thank QNAP Malaysia for sponsoring me this NAS and allowing me to use this storage for my production studio. So this is the TVS H1288X. It's a 12-bay NAS, and it can store up to about 270 to 290 terabytes of drive storage. It's fantastic for any production studio. I'd also like to thank Exascend for sending me these SSD drives. These are enterprise-class hard drives, and they're only 480 gigabytes of drive space, but I will definitely be calling up Exascend and trying to purchase some of their 4 terabyte enterprise-class SSD drives. I think that'd be a much better fit in this NAS drive for my high-speed QNAP or Qtier storage. So in the last thing before I go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, hit notifications, help grow the channel so that I can get more views on YouTube and we can get this information out to a larger audience. Don't forget to visit the Discord chat server. There's a link in the comment section below. And leave a comment. I do answer every comment on my channel. So that'll be about it for this video. I really enjoyed doing it, and I hope to see you in the next one.